bottom, but there are also little gaps in the line as well. And all of those things help to create a little bit of a sense of distance, but they also make it more convincing, in my humble opinion, as a tree trunk. Because, you know, we can draw a nice smooth tree trunk, but often, even if it is a smooth, almost cylindrical trunk, there are bits of, you know, moss and things growing off of it. So there's all sorts of stuff going on within nature. And the more you can use the randomness of the brush, the better, I feel. Now, in contradiction to what I was saying earlier about painting the crevices and things, there are some fairly dark shadows on these cliff faces. So having put down the base layer, where I did the sort of blended colour and texture, I'm now going against my own advice a little bit and just putting in some texture, but I'm doing it in a dry brush way for the most part. So again, I'm not drawing, you know, individual cracks in the cliff face. I'm just creating a little bit of texture on those cliff faces. But to be honest with you, I think I probably needn't have done that. Back into the shrubbery and the hedges and things on the cliff top. And then just dragging that same green down with the dry brush effect over the cliff face, because again, on the cliffs at Budleigh, they're this brilliant red colour. They're very distinctive, as I mentioned before, but yeah, there's all sorts of plant life growing, you know, beautiful bright greens against that complementary red. So I've just hinted at that, but really, like I just said, the trees I'm fairly happy with in terms of the level of detail and the amount of, you know, work I've put in. I think I kind of stopped at the right point. The cliffs perhaps went a little bit too far and should have just left them as they are. And I say this, you know, quite a lot in recent videos, you know, and I think artists do it as a rule. You know, it's about knowing when to stop, and I'm finding more and more and more, as I've said in you know, previous videos, I need to stop earlier on stuff. But I think what happens is I just start enjoying myself, so I start sort of, you know, exploring more and more. But you may remember there was a recent plein air video where I was down at Sidmouth, and that one I really took the approach with this watercolor plein air landscape painting on the beach, where I was painting for a bit and I deliberately walked away for maybe 5 minutes, and then I'd paint again for 5 minutes, then walk away for 5 minutes, and that really worked well for me. So I think I could probably afford to do the same thing with the acrylics as well. That would be helpful. But you know, no harm done really, but it's just a general observation looking back at my work. Okay, so what is this big patch of blue? Well, you can't tell from the reference photo because it looks like the most beautiful cloudless day, but there were a few clouds coming in just momentarily, you know, as they sailed by, and they would cast shadows on the beach. So I'm kind of making up this blue cast shadow from a cloud above, and I'm doing it quite deliberately and painting it in such a way that it's going to help me describe the stepped nature of the beach. And again, that's something that doesn't really come across in the reference I'm showing you. But the pebbles at Budleigh, you come in from the water, and it's where the tide is at the moment, it's a very steep incline. And then you come up onto a plateau, and then there's another steep incline of pebbles, then another little horizontal section, and then like kind of a rounded lump, which I'm painting at this very moment, and then up into the purple on the left. It kind of sweeps up almost like a skate park ramp a little bit. So by doing that, you know, it's kind of an artistic choice. It's created, I hope, more of a sense of 3D. So the beach has gone from what looked to be almost a flat surface once you come left of the water, to now hopefully it's beginning to look more like an undulating surface as you go from left to right. Now, having done that, I'm now doing something similar, but with a darker color. And, you know, you might sort of think, well, you know, perhaps that's a bit counterintuitive to do that. But the idea is the darker color is going to bring things forward, hopefully. And what I'm doing here is, having put the first shadow down, the first shadow is pretty much a strip of constant width. And I did that quite deliberately, as mentioned. But of course, clouds are not just rectangles floating it through the sky, casting perfectly equal width shadows. So in order to break away from that regular shape, the foreground shadow, I've deliberately changed the width quite dramatically, but I've still maintained, I hope, that sense of undulation as we go across the width of the beach. So apologies for the shadow I'm casting across the painting now and then. It's simply because I'm sort of moving around trying to lean over the... Oh, that was my leg. So what's happening is I'm sat on the pebbles, and having sat there for half an hour, I'm starting to ache a little bit. So I'm trying to stretch my legs out in different positions. But anyway, it's pretty clear now on the part I'm painting. So you can see I'm putting in a pale blue for the parasol, or one of the parasols. And when I get to this stage, obviously parasols are artificially made, and in addition to that, they can be pretty much any color you could imagine, but generally speaking, they're fairly bright. So what I'm tending to do is, rather than copy the parasols that are there, I'm thinking more about my painting. So for example, the blue I put down for the first parasol is deliberately darker than the sky, but it's also deliberately a different blue to pretty much anything I've used elsewhere in the painting. And then the yellow I just put down is a brighter color so that it contrasts with the blue that I put down just a moment ago. So in a nutshell, what I don't want to have within my painting is just 4 or 5 yellow parasols all grouped together, and then another patch of red parasols all grouped together, and so on. And now we're starting to think about how can I create this sense of depth. So just did the 2 parasols on the left, and they are clearly parasol shaped. But for those, I just put a couple of little flecks of paint off in the distance, and they're brightly colored as well. They could be parasols, or perhaps they are paddleboards, which are or surfboards or something like that, or inflatables, which are lent up on the pebbles or on the distant hedge. So already I'm starting to introduce some of these depth ideas. Clear shapes over on the left, but then off in the far, far distance, just little patches of colour. So here's another parasol coming in. You can see I've gone with sort of a salmon orange there. And we'll put another one down here near the water, but again I've added more red. So I'm just changing the colour, even if it's not that dramatic, every time I do a parasol. And in general, they're all going to be set up at more or less the same angle, because the sun is coming in from one direction, and generally speaking, people are seeking shade underneath these things. But there's always going to be a bit of variation, in part because some people will be not using them for that reason, or might have left them for a while. And when you stick the parasol rod into the pebbles with the best will in the world, I don't know about anybody else, but I can never get it at exactly the angle I want. So there's going to be variation. So I'm being careful to just have a little bit of variation there as well. And I forgot to mention, but you can see I've switched to a small filbert brush now. And just adding a little bit of a sense, or just added a little bit of a sense of light onto that sort of dark grey, greeny parasol that I just painted. But I'm back in with my watercolor marker now. And the reason I do this at this stage is, although there's definitely going to be some very loose interpretation and mark making of people off in the distance in a bit, within that loose impressionist pattern of marks, there need to be a couple of shapes which are very clearly identifiable as people, because otherwise I'm just going to have a load of random marks. So I'm going to need a couple of people which definitely look like people, and then hopefully the viewer's mind will then read the rest of the marks as people, if that makes any sense. You can see I kind of messed up a little bit there with the watercolor marker, so I just came back in with a damp brush and softened. Didn't manage to remove the marks completely, but I softened a lot of the watercolor and just spread it around a bit to approximately delete that mark. So decided to come in with a bit of a bolder move and put a deck chair in there. And the great thing about painting this subject from life is, I mean, you can do this with a photo as well to an extent, but you know, if there's not a deck chair there, somewhere on the, or if there is, it's not at the right angle. Somewhere on the beach there probably is going to be when it's as crowded as it is. So I can't remember where I sourced this deck chair from, but you know, I have no hesitation about, you know, moving people around in my painting to where I want them to be, even if they're nowhere near that location in actuality. So we've got a deck chair, and then there's somebody sat on the pebbles there, and you can see I'm using the watercolor marker to draw in the silhouette of the hair. And then I've put a little box, I'm putting a little box or cooler box there next to her.